On March 24th, the Postal Service placed its first port. We'll just continue right now. On March 24th, the Postal Service placed its first purchase order of 50,000 vehicles with Oshkosh. And although the Postal Service initially insisted it could buy only 5,000 electric vehicles in this first order, it doubled that amount to 10,000 after this committee and others began to ask questions. So I'd first like to ask Ms. Stephen, can you briefly explain what changed the Postal Service's analysis to allow for the increase of EVs in this purchase order?
Yes. Am I on? There we go. Thank you for the question. The first thing that is important to note is that the Postal Service has committed to continuing to reassess changes in the market. And so the point that you and some of the other speakers have made today about changing fuel prices, $2.19 was the price at the time that we prepared the analysis. We have continued to do ongoing analysis on changing fuel prices and sensitivity analysis to determine if that changes our mix. It certainly does. The gas prices are higher today than they were when we prepared the initial analysis. So that's one factor. The other key factor is that through the efforts of you and your colleagues, postal reform is making a big difference for the Postal Service. It allows us the flexibility to consider our capital position differently than prior to the passage of postal reform. So between those two key variables, we were able to go back and assess our ability to increase the proportion of electric vehicles within our financial resources and within our means, and we're happy to do that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're going to reassess and see if we can move more to electric vehicles, given the testimony we received today, and I'm glad to hear that the postal reform bill is making changes that are helping you reassess. Yes or no, will the Postal Service provide the committee with a copy of the analysis that you used to determine how many electric vehicles to purchase? Yes or no? Will you provide us with that information, please?
If it's specifically requested and protected, yes.
Thank you. Okay, the Postal Service now has roughly $23 billion on hand, including $13 billion that's not allocated to pay down debt. And this committee's bipartisan work will save the Postal Service roughly $50 billion over the next 10 years, and we are proud of that achievement. And we know that EVs are a good investment for the future, for the environment, for our country, for national security. We are asking you to go back and look again and see if we can increase the purchase of the EVs even more. So, Ms. Stephen, given all this, will the Postal Service commit to conducting a new analysis of the EV costs and develop a more aggressive proposal to buy more EVs? We heard several criticisms from many of the panelists today of the analysis and ways that it was possibly not accurate. So could you go back and develop a new analysis for us, given the changing environment, given the changing environmental environment, given the report from the United Nations, given the war in Ukraine, which means we have to get off of oil faster and more effectively? Could you go back and please try a new analysis, given the information we learned today and the changing world economy?
So we've committed to doing ongoing updates as conditions change in the market. So I don't think a new analysis is required. I think the analysis that we've prepared is well designed to look at those variables and assess relative impact. And I think it's also important to note that the $13 billion cash on hand that you referred to is also designated for key fundamental investments that are part of our Delivering for America strategic plan. There have been many things that have gone underinvested over the last many, many years. And so there are other financial priorities that are competing for our resources to make sure that we're addressing all of those needs in addition to the delivery vehicles.
Well, GAO, in their testimony, said they had analyzed the Postal Service's estimates and the cost of buying and maintaining electric vehicles, so I'd like to get their view on it now. So, Ms. Whitcomb, Ms. Nauman, based on GAO's analysis, Did the Postal Service make assumptions that you believe are unreasonable and need to be corrected? Could you use the mic?
Our work is still ongoing, and so from our preliminary observations, what we've seen in the documentation the Postal Service has provided us so far, we have some questions. We have questions about how current some of the data is. We have questions about how reasonable some of the estimates are. We have questions about how consistent it is with other information that we've seen in the market and from the Postal Service. And so as we continue our work, we will test these assumptions. We'll gather additional insight from the Postal Service and other sources and assess that against some objective criteria to make our final conclusions.
Well, thank you. I want to thank all of the panelists. I personally believe that the leadership of the Postal Service relied on faulty assumptions and needs to go back to the drawing board and come up with a much more aggressive plan to electrify the fleet. Otherwise, they risk saddling the Postal Service with an antiquated, gas-guzzling fleet for the next 20 years. I now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Comer. You are now recognized.